Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. I almost only have time to tell you hello and bye-bye, because I have to talk only, they give me now 15 minutes to summarize for you what I would like to tell you. What exactly I would like to tell you is how African swine fever enter in a farm, which are really the important points, the key points for the infection of one farm, and what are the important of the spread of the virus. This virus is in general not well known, and this is the reasons why we are having so much trouble. So I will try to do my best, but I don't have time. So I apologize, and I give you already, I don't know if you see it. No, you don't put this in the screen. Oh, now it's in the screen. So you have already my email in the back of these presentations. So please feel free to contact me at any time, because I really would like to help you. So, as you know, African swine fever is today the biggest threat that we have in the swine industry. And the reason of that is because, as you can see, there are several continents, 3 continents are already affected, more than 50 countries, and they have 6 different scenarios. So today, what I want to tell you is why are the key point for that, and what are the differences of the African swine fever in the different 6 scenarios. So these are the 6 scenarios that I have for you. Probably I have to skip all of them, but so far I will try to do my best. Other important point is that just with Eurasia, so that means Europe plus Asia, we have the 75% of the total swine populations living in an affected ASF country. So that means that the swine industry can make big changes after African swine fever, especially if we look that probably ASF is going to continue in spread. And you're going to see why it's going to continue in spread. And most of them because the disease is not well known. As you can see, since 2000, the disease started, as you know, when the Caucasian country was infected. They later moved up through Russia. Later, they go into the European Union, and now to Asia. So as you can see, in the last year, we have a lot of increase in outbreak. So the disease is really out to be under control. It's absolutely out of control. So what can we do at these situations? The most important to know the disease. This is the most important, and that's why I want to spend a few minutes, well, I don't know how many seconds, to tell you what exactly are the main point of this disease. And that's why I call here, to know me is to kill me. I know people use this, to know me is to love me, but I think that it's very important when you fight against one virus, to know well the virus. If you want to win the game with ASF, you should know ASF. And as I told you, many people don't know it so far. So first of all, the virus is a very complex virus. It's go between 170 to 194,000 kilobases. So it's the most complex virus that affecting the livestock. The most complex. Foot and mouth have 10, pigs have very little kilobase. So that means very little genes, very little proteins, and very little information. Easy to know it. This one is very complex, and is also very resistant. One of the important points of this structure is that they make it very resistant in environments. And that's the reasons why ASF is moving, because one of the things that they have is very resistant. Secondly, they have genetic variability. So that means we cannot talk about one ASF. There are going to be several clinical forms of ASF with the time, because they normally start very acute. But later, the natural evolution of ASF is to very attenuated forms. So it's important to know that. The most important point also is that this unknown neutralizing antibodies. So this virus don't induce neutralizing antibodies. As you know, most of the protection, the 100% of the protection against viruses is because the help of neutralizing antibodies. And this particular virus, we don't know the proteins that induce any neutralizing antibody. We don't find neutralizing antibodies. We don't know if it's because no protein is coding that or because other proteins are blocking the action and they don't left to see the immune system, the potential neutralizing antibodies protein. That is the reasons why we have so much trouble to obtain a good and safe vaccine. But I have also to tell you as a good news that in the last year we increased quite a lot the research, and there is today several prototypes that some of them are promising. It's going to be probably in a couple of years a good and safe vaccine. Now, the other point is that I want to explain to you is because we don't have neutralizing antibodies, but we want to distinguish between the different isolates, we have to work with genotypes. Genotypes are not based on protection because it's not based on neutralizations. It's based on the genetic, some particular protein, the VP72, that is a very stable protein. So the differences, genetic difference that we found in the VP72 are the ones that help us to establish 24 different genotypes. But everybody is thinking that the genotypes have an important relations with the virulence or with the protection. Not at all. Absolutely not at all. Because the proteins that mark the differences is a protein that don't play any role in protection, no role in virulence. So don't confuse genotypes with protection or with attenuations. This is nothing mean. We only put that genotypes to know how some virus isolates are moving. It's just a traceability, but not really a good marker for virulence or for protection. The other point is how ASF transmit. What are the important routes that you have to be very carefully with them and how they work? So the first one is the direct transmissions between infected animals or carrier animals. That's another key word I want to put you. Not only we have infected animal, we're going to have also survivor animal of ASF, and most of these, or a few of these, depending of the isolates, between a 3% to a 5% can become carriers. So they also can infect it, even that they don't look sick at all. So the infection of the infected animal or the carrier animals are a very important way. And in particular, I want to pay attention of the wild boar. Wild boar in most areas that ASF is already present has increased the populations more than 700%. So in Europe, in the European Union, we have a big problem with the wild boar. In the rest of Europe also have a problem. Asia still don't have too much problem. They only declare 3 cases with wild boar. But I can show you later that is full of wild boar as well. So in the future, it's going to be more outbreak there due to the wild boar. So attention to the wild boar. Also in this country, the feral pigs are also increasing a lot in the last year. So the other way of transmission is an indirect system. The indirect system is a very, very important mechanism of ASF. And this is due to the fact, you can see here an erythrocyte. I don't know if you see this. This is an erythrocyte. And here, up the erythrocyte, is the virus. So ASF virus is attached on the erythrocytes. This is how ASF virus move on the body of the infected animal. And so that means that a single drop of blood have more than 3 million copies of virus. So blood is one of the most important mechanisms to infect and to transmit and spread the disease. And people don't pay attention to that. But that is probably the most important. And if you combine the strong presence of virus and blood plus the resistance of the virus, you have a very, very big enemy. So You have to be careful with the soil feeding. Why the soil feeding is so important? Because there are many, unfortunately, in many infected countries, they are sending the animals to the slaughterhouse, and most of these animals are positive to ASF virus. So they are producing meat that is infected with the virus. And why is infected? Because they keep blood, because they are very fresh products generally. So in the blood is a lot of concentration of the virus. So that is the reason why soil feeding is so dangerous, because they have virus, very active virus and very resistant virus. That's the point. It's not because the salami is good or bad. It's because they are produced with infected meat that have virus, carry the virus, a resistant virus. Also, that is important to know in the vehicles. The vehicles can be clean, but if they are not disinfected, very well disinfected, the virus will stay there. Even that you don't going to see the blood, but the virus is going to be there. So that's why vehicles are very important, as well as the boat and the chute of the people. That's why they have to be removed, absolutely. Also be careful with the feces, because most of the feces and infected animals have also blood. But I'm going to give you a good news. Not only are going to be bad news. The good news is that African swine fever is not very transmissible disease. It's not as much as transmissible as ASF, classical swine fever, foot and mouth disease, or PRRS. Why? Because the aerosol mechanism is not very efficient in African swine fever infection. I always joking about this idea, and I always compare that with me. I usually walk with crutches, and when I go with crutches, I go very slow, but I go around the world. If you see my passport, you will be impressed. So with the crutches, you can move slow, but go everywhere. That's exactly what African swine fever is doing. It's slow, but go everywhere. Now with my Lamborghini, it's different, because with the Lamborghini, I go faster. I am more a foot and mouth already. Anyway, that's good. Blood, be careful with blood. And how we make mistake with the blood? Why we do it, the mistake in the farm? Let me put you an example. I can put you many. ASF, when they enter in one farm, they usually are not very explosive. Only a few little animals affected. And what we have to do it, is to make the necropsis. So we do the necropsis, probably you don't see anything, probably you see it, but if you are not carefully, when you have the necrosis and you make blood over there, this blood, if you don't pay attention to the blood, you're going to be in trouble, because you are going to spread with this blood all the virus. And a few days after, these fair animals that you don't pay too much attention, is when you have an explosion of ASF. So normally, this outbreak is secondary. The first one normally is not well detected, it's not quickly detected, and this is something we have to pay attention. And it's very important because of the importance of the blood. When you do the necrosis, be careful that will be no flies around, because flies are a fantastic vector, a mechanic vector to take the blood and go from one farm to another. So if it's in summer, please be careful. Don't do a necrosis. You don't use the insecticide first to kill the flies, or you have an electrical system to kill the flies. Flies are terrible. They are very efficient. They fly all over other farm around, and the virus can be stable and infected for more than 48 hours. So be careful with the flies. So again, I told you, one drop of blood has 3,000 million copies. So that is enough to infect a farm. Let's go more. Why is so much resistant in the soil feeding? Look at that. 110 days and 4 degrees. 1,000 days if the meat is frozen. 18 months and just a regular blood at 4 degrees. Or 1 month and one pig pen that is not well disinfected. So what that means? That means that this virus is very resistant, and sometimes you probably can have the virus in your farm already in the refrigerator of your worker because they bring product to it, and that is very dangerous. I found many already in many places. So be careful with that. This is the reasons why it's very resistant. I told you, and if resistant and the blood, they are the 2 points you have to remember. The other things that is terribly dangerous is that many countries, because they don't have good compensations when they have an outbreak, the tendency is to put the animal that can walk or go to the track to the slaughterhouse. Normally the slaughterhouse pay a little less, but they receive more money than nothing if it's no compensation. So what happened with that situation happened? You have a lot of virus in the slaughterhouse, they're going to produce meat, they're going to have products, and these products are going to go back by thrill feeding to your farm. And this is the reasons why the virus is moving all over, especially in the backyard production. This is stupid. We are infecting ourselves. And that is one of the points. I'm going to show you, if I arrive in time, what are the main mistakes around the world. Now, the other point is that we can have a very acute formal. Normally, in a naive area, the ASF is going to start with a very aggressive presence. So that means clear lesions. I would like it to show you what lesion you have to see it, but that's clearly, I don't have time to do it. So I want to tell you, related with that we have an important situation when you are a naive area. When you are naive, a country, that means the virus came the first time in this country, normally it's very easy to detect PCR because the viremia is very high. And there are very low or none antibodies in these cases. But this situation changes as soon as you are not already naive. You start to be endemic. So in the case of endemic, it's just the contrary. Sometimes you don't have a clear PCR, or it's an intermittent viremia, so you can find it or not find it, but always antibodies are going to be present. And because today we don't have a vaccine yet, antibodies mean infection. So that's clear. So what I recommend you, never use only PCR for diagnosis, because the animal that you have there, or the tissue, or the blood, probably is already with an attenuated strain. So you do both, PCR and antibodies, and you're going to have 100% of security of your diagnosis. Now, I would like it to show you the different, I don't know, Chair, what I do.
You keep going.
Yeah, are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. But don't fight to me, huh?
You're done.
We continue? Yes. Okay, so let me show you what happened around the world and what is the biggest mistakes that we have around the world. We have the cathedral of ASF, the cathedral and the factory of the virus in Africa, in particular in East and South Africa. This is the worst part in the world that we have to finish with ASF. And I'm going to explain you why. The reason, you know that the virus that already is affecting most of us came from here, from the east part of Madagascar or the continent. But we know that the virus was here. We know perfectly. So they moved by a boat. They went to the Poti Harbor and start all the history in 2007. So why this South Africa is so complicated? West Africa is less. I'm going to explain you why. In East and South Africa, the problem are these two guys, the Facochero and the bush pigs. These guys are tolerant to the virus, not resistant. Tolerance. So that means that they became infected, but they don't suffer the disease. Why they don't suffer the disease? Because the virus never amplify more virus than 10 to 2. This is a very low amount of virus. Why? We don't know. I study so much these guys to understand which are the immunological mechanisms that make these situations, why they are tolerant. But they are. So what happened with these guys? They have the virus 10 to 2, but in Africa we also have ticks. And ticks as you know, probably, it's also a very important biological vector. What is the difference between a mechanic and a biological? The mechanic just is a transporter. The biological is reproducing the virus, is replicating the virus. So these guys they have two actions. One, they amplify the virus from 10 to 2, and they go to 10 to 7 or 10 to 8. So a big amount of virus, and they infected domestic or other wild animals. And this is the cycle that we have in Africa. And it's very difficult to stop that cycle. Only if we have a good vaccine to vaccinate this animal, we can do it. Because it eliminated the soft ticks. It's very difficult. Let's go and move to Europe. In Europe, we have 3 different scenarios. We have in the European Union 2 different scenarios. We have the new infection countries due to this new outbreak that is here and this part of there. And here is mainly based due to the wild boar. So I'm going to show you in Europe the biggest problem that we have is the wild boar, because our biosafety and farm is good enough to not allow to come in, except 2 countries of the European Union, when we are more similar to the other part of Europe that they have both wild boar outbreak and domestic outbreak. These 2 countries are Romania and Bulgaria, because they also have low biosecurity and some farm. But also we have the third scenario is in the island of Sardinia that since 1978 keep with ASF infected. But finally we found what exactly was the source of the virus. They finished with that. This year was no outbreak in Sardinia, and probably next year is going to be free. So the summary of the situation is that we have a big part of Europe infected already. In the European side, it's mainly due to in the European Union side, it's mainly due to the wild boar, except these 2 countries, and in the other part of Europe, it's a mix of both. So why that situation? Because there are so many backyard in this area. So you can see here the 2 European countries I mentioned was the Bulgaria and Romania, and these 2 are more similar to the pattern that we see on the west part of Europe. Now, I'm going to continue as fast as possible. Let's move to Asia. In Asia, the first thing that surprised me a lot, and to all my team, was how quick the disease spread. In less than 1 year, the virus moved all over the country and out of Asia, out of China, in other countries as well, as you know. So why they moved so fast? What was the reason to explain why? I'm going to tell you. The first one is that probably when they declared the first official outbreak, probably was other outbreak before. And this is many stories that probably are real. We don't know for sure, but look like probably was also other outbreak that before that was not declared, and that's why they spread so quickly. But this is not proven, so it's only an hypothesis. The other things I'm going to tell you are real. One, there are 2 by traditions. The people are doing for many years. What they are doing? They buy blood in the slaughterhouse and they mix the blood with the grain to feed the animals. Why? Because it's cheaper and they give proteins. And they do that frequently. And what happens when you use blood? You know already, is a lot of virus there. Okay? So they do that system. Also, I'm talking about the backyard, of course. Also, the other tradition is to use the swill feeding. The pigs normally are eating all what are left over in a house. So there are many swill feeding in the outdoor production. Also, because the compensation is low or none, they put animals on the slaughterhouse. Some of them can be infected, and they are already on the system. Also, the vehicles normally are not well disinfected. They also have very limited biosecurity in the backyard production, and the lack of compensation or the little compensation make also a big problem. So The other point that is important to keep up, because it's going to be in the near future a big problem, is the wild boar. Look Europe. In Europe we have more than 7,700 outbreaks related directly with wild boar. In Asia, only 3. But if you look at the map of abundance, it's here, in red, you can see that the amount of wild boar that Asia have, it's a lot of higher than the European wild boar population. So that means that still we have to wait for more outbreak related with wild boar, or probably most of the ones that already are in domestic has been related with the wild boar, even that has been not identified that situation. The other point that I want to tell you is the main difference I see in Asia in general between the backyard and the industrialized farm. In the backyard, the big problem why the disease is continuing is for the soil feeding and the contact with the wild boar and the lack of compensation. But in the big farms that they have a very good biosecurity, most of them, the problem that we found is no compensation in big farms. So that means, million pigs, what you do with all these pigs without compensation. So what they try to do, and every day more people are trying to do that, is to play game with the virus. So they go to the partial depopulation. To play with a virus like ASF, the first thing you have to do when you play with someone is to know the game. And sometimes the people that do that don't know well the game. So ASF always win. So what happened is that they have reinfection, and reinfection. Why? Because when they found the outbreak, they try to stop the outbreak when the animals are affected and so near there. But they move a lot. ASF has been moving from one infected to other places. So they do PCR. PCR is negative. But because they need time, it's incubation period. You need time to do it. So they said, no, it's until here. That's out. The other is okay, clean. They don't clean well. They don't disinfect it well. They don't wait for it to be dry to go to the second one. They don't put sentinel animals. They just clean and go. And they keep many of the products that are there because they don't want to spend that. And that's why the reinfection coming. So if you want to play with ASF virus, you have to know how ASF virus resists and do everything to win. So far, ASF is winning in China. Is winning a lot. In the backyard, they kill already a big number of animals. In industrial also. But ASF is really a very resistant virus, and they have this mechanism of blood that is very important. So be careful to play with him. I think we can do that, but we have to do it well. Otherwise, it's very difficult. And keep in mind that repopulation, the partial depopulation could be possible, but when you play the game well. If you don't play the game well, don't do it. And of course, we have to finish this, avoid this cycle. Now, which are the challenges at this moment? We have 2 challenges, and I can tell you that both challenges are possible. The first challenge is to have farm free of ASF in a country infected. This is possible, and we know how to do it. We did in our country, we did in Italy, we did in many places where we have been working. So ASF is relatively easy to control. It's relatively easy. It's really not so complicated like the ones that go by aerosol. We have to control this parameter that I told you. So we can produce with ASF free and our farm free in an infected country. Of course, our product could be an infected product unless that we go to the compartmentalizations. But there are many solutions. The first point is to obtain farm-free and infected country. The second challenge will be the eradications. But we have to do that first. It's impossible to think that if we don't do that, we can eradicate in our country. Impossible. So we first of all have to learn how to really produce free farm on infected country. The second one will be the eradication. So to the States, I only would like to say that I am very worried about also the increase like happened in Europe and Asia. Is not unique in the United States, it's around the world, the important increase of the feral or wild boar pigs. This is very important because these guys, as you know, eat garbage. Garbage at the restaurant, garbage at many places, so they can be the amplifier. That is what happened in Europe. You know, they go to the park, they go to places where people put the garbage there and they infect it. So it's a very important route. I am very happy to see that the guys in the border try to stop that, but they said it's difficult to stop everything. So the ones that go to a garbage after they have a picnic or wherever are very dangerous because these guys are amplifier and it's full. As you can see, they were really increased a lot. So that's what I try to tell you. I'm sorry that I have to go so fast, but I go with the Lamborghini now and go a little faster. But I hope that you want to join me in this fight again to have a world free of ASF. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Dolores has a party across the street, and Lucina said she's not going to start it without me. So if anybody has a question, now's the time.
It's true, you are the guy of the party.
Are you familiar with the tooth extraction method in China with test and removal?
Yeah.
Do you think that works?
Oh, well, I think it's working, but I don't know how safe it's working.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
The Vietnam professor shared the fact in Vietnam, sows are more susceptible. In China, it's also like that. Sows are more susceptible than the nursery and the finishing pigs. And why do you think that's, why is sow more susceptible? That's what's happening on the ground.
Well, I think that depending on many things, but of course the sows could be immunologically a little more in problems than other animals on the farms. But normally we also find that on piglets. So piglets is very, when they finish with the mother in this period of transitions, we found that is also very infected. So probably in this case in Vietnam was more clear the sows, but I saw everywhere. Also fattering places are infected. So depending on the doses, depending on the entrance, I don't think that there are, in my knowledge so far, I don't see big differences.
Also,
yeah, thank you for your comments. Under what conditions, in let's say a large, whether it's a U.S., North American, or Chinese or Asian sow herd, let's say it's a 5,000 or 6,000 sow herd, under what conditions would test and removal work with this virus?
How we finish? You mean how long they're going to take?
What would you have to do to be successful if you attempted a test and removal?
Yeah.
What would need to be done to be successful in a large sow herd?
Okay. The first thing is to avoid the entrance in your farm. I think this is the most important because you are already in Sussex if you do that. So to avoid the entrance, you know already the main mechanism why the virus is going to be. These are the main mechanisms. There are no other. So this is how normally the virus go in. So if we control that situation, if we control not contact with wild boar or with feral pigs, if we control the people going to visiting you, if you control the people working with you don't bring food and they don't use the food in your farm, if you control the blood and the vehicle disinfection, etc., you will be success to not be infected. Now, what happens if you are infected? What happened? So that situation is very important because especially today that we have big, large farmer with a lot of animals and it's very difficult the compensation of all that and sacrifice many normal pigs is really also very anti-natural. So we have to have a program to stop a similar program that we have in the houses with the fire. So how to stop the fire and from one room to another, how to stop the fire from one place to another. So today we have a mechanism to recommend it to how you can control, like in a fire, how you can control in your farm with some type of measures to avoid the contact between one part of your farm to other part of your farm. So we can do that. We can compartmentalize even a farm with a biosecurity enough to avoid the contacts. Because as I told you, by aerosol, this virus is not very efficient. This is an advantage that we have to play. And it's possible to do it.
Way in the back, one last question.
The other day on Saturday, I asked you a question, and the answer at that moment pretty convinced me. But then, when I was returning home, I started to have doubts and all that. So I would like to repeat your question with a follow-up question. For all the people, we are saying that we are training people to recognize lesions in post-mortem examinations, but at the same time we are saying that necropsies, it's better to not do necropsies because the blood is very infective and the flies problems and all that. So my question is, and you answered me that we can sample oral fluids to get a result. So, and it pretty convinced me. But then I started to think that, in oral fluids, we only know if we have African swine fever or we have not African swine fever. But at the end, we don't know which is the problem of the animal that has died. And at the same time, we are losing pretty much information about that animal, and we are losing a lot of time in resolving, let's say, the farm problem at that time. So if that situation was real, and what we do with that?
Okay, I'm going to try to convince you today, okay? Give me that opportunity. I'm going to try to, I cannot explain you well what I thought the other day. I don't remember the question, but I'm going to tell you I am in favor, absolutely, of the necropsies. Absolutely, because this is a beautiful market. The only thing I told you is be careful when you do the necropsies, when you perform a necropsis, because in most cases, the guys that are doing the necropsis are the ones that are spreading the virus and ASF. That's why I told you be careful. But it's not that I am against that. I think it's very important. It's a matter of fact that we already classify which lesions are always the ones that are commonly observed with the virus that is already circulating around the world. And we know the percentage, and we know that lymph nodes, spleen is almost in the 900% affected. So this is a good marker to thinking, well, could be the skin lesions are important. And so we know that. And I think that's fantastic. And our veterinarians have to work in that. What I told you is be careful with the necrosis, be careful with the insects, be careful with all the situation, but of course do it. It's very, very important. And what I told you about oral fluid is that I prefer at this moment when you are in alarm and areas that are already infected, not in the case of the States, but in places where they are infected and they are protected themselves to not be infected. You know, when you bleed animals, you usually have blood, and it's more complicated. But today, we know that oral fluid is fantastic for PCR and fantastic for antibodies. So if we keep every day the oral fluid, and our farm is going to be cheaper, and it's going to monitoring perfectly the enter of one potential disease. So that's why I recommended that, but not in instance of the necrosis. If I did that the other day, was a confusion on me. I really believe a lot in pathology, a lot.
Okay, if anybody else has any other questions for Dr. Jose, you got to get up there and catch him before he rolls off in his Lamborghini, because we're going across the street for a beer. Thank you very much.